Hi, I'm Lavinia. My fiance's mother called me a gold digger at our engagement dinner, and he just laughed, saying, "She's just being honest." So I slipped off the ring, left it on the table, and walked out while they all stared. They thought they were cutting me out. What they didn't know was that the gift I left behind would take everything they thought they owned, and leave them begging for the silence they once demanded from me. Have you ever been pushed so far that leaving becomes the only way to save yourself? Drop a comment. Tell me when you've had to walk away to finally breathe. I could feel the cold seeping into my bones the second I stepped out of the car, clutching the small velvet pouch with my mother's pearl earrings inside. The Seattle air was sharp that evening, the kind that made you straighten your spine whether you wanted to or not. I slipped the pearls on, letting them brush against my jaw, reminding me of her soft laughter when she used to pin my hair back before school. A reminder of who I was before all of this. Le Jardin looked too perfect, too polished, with its soft lighting spilling out onto the sidewalk, drawing in people who belonged here. I wasn't sure I did, but I walked in anyway, the navy dress I had saved for months to buy fitting just right, hugging me with quiet confidence as I crossed the threshold. The hostess smiled, but her eyes flickered past me, searching for the real guest of importance. Oren's name, his mother's reputation, their family's money. I wasn't blind to it. Inside, the warmth smelled of butter and expensive wine, laughter rising from tables where women with hair too perfect and diamonds too large glanced at me over their rims of glasses. The maitre d' led me to the private dining room in the back. Oren stood to greet me, smiling in that careful way he did when he wasn't sure how to read the room yet. His hand grazed my back, steady but a bit too light, like he was worried someone would see him touch me for too long. "Glad you made it," he whispered, eyes scanning me up and down quickly before he kissed my cheek. I tried to read the warmth there, tried to believe it was enough. Isolde, his mother, was seated at the head of the table, wrapped in a cream cashmere shawl that matched the frost in her hair. She gave me that small, precise smile, the one that didn't reach her eyes. "Lavinia, how lovely," she said, letting her gaze drop to the dress, the pearls. "It's nice to see someone who knows how to dress appropriately for an occasion." I thanked her quietly, sliding into the seat Oren pulled out. The table was set with heavy silverware and plates that probably cost more than my rent. Water glasses filled, wine poured, the small talk began, and I felt every word cling to me like static. Oren's father, Harlan, cleared his throat as the first course was served, raising his glass, eyes glinting under the chandelier. "To new beginnings," he said, "and to pulling oneself up by the bootstraps." He smiled as if it were a joke, but it wasn't. I caught the way Isolde's lip curled when she looked at me. I tried to focus on Oren's hand under the table, the way he squeezed my fingers now and then, a silent promise that we were a team. But even he couldn't hide the tightness in his jaw when Isolde launched into a conversation about family legacy, the importance of marrying well, and ensuring the Bennett name remained untainted. "Of course," Isolde said lightly, swirling her wine. "In these times, a prenup is simply practical. We all have to protect what we've built." I swallowed hard, setting down my fork. "I understand," I said, keeping my voice even. "I have no issue with a fair prenup." "Oh, how pragmatic," Isolde said, her smile sharp now. "Your mother must be so proud." "My mother passed away when I was 19, I replied, the words careful, the air around the table tightening. Isolde tilted her head. "Oh, how tragic, but I'm sure she would have been happy to see you secure a good match." It was the way she said it, like she was complimenting a stray dog for finding a warm porch. I waited for Oren to speak, to step in, to tell her enough was enough. His fingers slipped from mine and he stared at his plate. "Of course you love him," she continued, leaning back, her voice taking on that false sweetness that cuts deeper than anger. "The money is just a fortunate bonus, isn't it?" Harlan chuckled, low and cold, shaking his head. "Pretty young women from modest backgrounds don't chase men like my son for their personalities." The room went silent. My pulse pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I looked at Oren. His lips parted like he was about to say something, but then, "He's just being honest," Oren muttered, a weak, nervous chuckle breaking the air. My heart dropped, a cold, hollow thud in my chest. The betrayal wasn't in the words themselves, but in the way he let them sit there, in the way he let me drown under their weight while he looked away. I reached up and felt the pearls at my ears, grounding myself in the memory of my mother's hands, her strength, the way she told me to stand up for myself even when it hurt. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just slipped the engagement ring from my finger, the diamond catching the light for a moment before I set it down beside Oren's water glass. The clink echoed, louder than the chatter that resumed around us in forced discomfort. Oren's hand shot out, but I stepped back. I straightened my posture, lifting my chin as I turned away from the table. My heels clicked against the floor as I walked out, each step pulling me further from the shame, the betrayal, the stifling room filled with forced smiles and thinly veiled insults. As I pushed open the heavy door to the street, the cold night air rushed over me, clearing the heaviness in my lungs. The pearls brushed against my skin, a gentle reminder of who I was, who I would always be, regardless of the name on my finger or the family that refused to see me as more than a transaction. They will realize what they lost, but it will be too late. I left the restaurant with the ring still sitting next to Oren's glass, the street swallowing me in its quiet chill as I walked back to my apartment. My heels echoed along the cracked sidewalks of Capitol Hill, past the coffee shop that closed an hour ago, past the corner store where I used to grab milk and lottery tickets for the old man who always smiled at me. It was late, but the city never truly went silent, not even on nights like this. When I got to my building, I let myself in, the keys rattling louder than I wanted them to. The hallway smelled like old carpet and someone's takeout, a reminder of lives stacked on top of each other, each with its own mess and hope and regret. I didn't bother turning on the overhead light when I stepped into my apartment. I slipped off my shoes by the door, feeling the relief as my feet touched the cold hardwood, the navy dress shifting around my legs, heavy with the weight of the evening. The rain had started again, tapping softly against the window, a dull rhythm that filled the silence I hadn't realized was so complete. I pulled the throw blanket off the back of the couch and wrapped it around my shoulders, but it didn't do much to warm me. The lights from the neighboring building blinked in and out of the fog, and I could see a couple arguing in the apartment across the way, hands waving, faces tight, a story unfolding behind glass while I stood frozen in mine. I looked around at the small space, the takeout containers from last night still on the counter, the sticky note on the fridge with "wedding tasks" written in my handwriting. It was a list that felt like it belonged to someone else now. Cake flavors, invitation designs, a venue deposit that sat like a stone in my gut. Plans I thought we were making together, while Oren's mother measured me up like I was a debt waiting to be paid. My phone was still in my bag, buzzing with notifications I didn't want to check. I pulled it out anyway, scrolling through pictures of us, Oren's arm around me, our smiles wide and eager, the ring on my finger catching the sun during a hike just a few weeks ago. I didn't recognize that version of me, the girl who thought if she tried hard enough, she could belong anywhere. My thumb hovered over the photo before I shut off the screen, tossing the phone onto the couch. It bounced once, the silence swallowing the soft thud as it landed. I sat there, clutching the blanket tighter, as tears started to slip down my cheeks. They weren't loud, weren't dramatic, just a quiet trail of salt that tasted like all the words I didn't say at that table, all the moments I swallowed because I didn't want to ruin the night, the weekend, the trip, the future. I thought love meant keeping the peace, that if I stayed quiet, people would see I was worth their kindness. The apartment was too quiet. I could hear the pipes in the walls creaking, the hum of the refrigerator, the rain tapping against the glass like it was asking if I was still here. I was, but I wasn't sure what that meant anymore. When my phone rang, the sound cut through the silence like a sharp breath. I saw Eloin's name on the screen, the sister who always called at the worst moments, or maybe the right ones, depending on how you looked at it. I wiped at my face, taking a deep breath before answering. "Hey," I managed, my voice tight. "May, it's late," Elawan said, her voice warm but edged with that directness she never lost, even after moving to California, even after building a life that looked so stable from the outside. "I saw your texts. What happened?" I tried to hold it together, but the sob came out, ragged and tired. "I left," I whispered. "Good," she said without hesitation. "Mom would have been proud of you for walking out of there." I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling the ache of missing someone who would have told me the same thing, who would have stood up at that table without a second thought. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," I said, the words spilling before I could stop them. "I thought he would say something, anything." "I know," Elawan said, "but he didn't, and that tells you everything you need to know, May. We talked for a while about Mom, about the pearl earrings I wore, about how she used to tell us to leave places that hurt, even if we thought we could make them better by staying." I could hear the quiet in Elawan's house, the way she paused before speaking, choosing her words like she always did. She reminded me that leaving didn't make me weak, that choosing myself wasn't a betrayal. When we hung up, I placed the phone on the coffee table, the screen reflecting the small lamp I'd turned on to keep the dark from swallowing me whole. I took off the earrings carefully, placing them next to the phone, the pearls catching the light, small reminders of a promise to myself, to the woman who raised me to know when enough was enough. I curled up on the couch, pulling the blanket around me, letting the exhaustion settle into my bones as the rain continued to fall outside. The silence wasn't comforting, but it was honest, and I found a strange relief in that honesty. I stared at the earrings, at the phone that held all the messages I didn't want to read, and whispered into the quiet, "What now?" The phone vibrated once, the screen lighting up with Oren's name, casting a glow on the coffee table before it faded when I didn't reach for it. I let it ring, the sound cutting through the room before dissolving back into the cold quiet, leaving only the rain to fill the space again. By the time dawn started pressing pale light against my windows, I was sitting on the living room floor with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, my dress crumpled in a corner where I left it when I finally pulled on sweatpants and a sweater. The drizzle hadn't stopped all night, a quiet, steady patter on the glass that felt like a steady reminder I was still here, still breathing, even when it hurt to take each breath. I didn't sleep. I'd tried, climbing into bed with the blanket wrapped around me, but the silence was loud, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw Oren's face across the table, the quick flicker of his eyes when his mother laughed and called me a gold digger, the way his lips twitched up in that small, cowardly laugh, that shrug he gave like he was saying, "Don't make it a thing." It was never a thing, until it was everything. I found myself sitting on the floor, pulling open the boxes I had stacked next to the couch, boxes of wedding magazines, planners with color-coded sticky notes, a folder of receipts. I didn't plan to go through them. I had planned to throw them all out, but my hands wouldn't let go, and soon I was flipping through the pages, looking at the notes I had written in the margins in a pen that had long since dried up, a list of venues with deposit dates circled, payment amounts written next to them in my handwriting. I found a notebook I had nearly forgotten about, a plain, spiral-bound thing with a cover that had started peeling at the corners. Inside were columns of dates and amounts, payments I had made, checks I had written for deposits, catering tastings, flower arrangements. Small amounts here and there, but consistent. Things I paid for because Oren's family was covering the big things, and it was just easier if I handled the details. Easier for who, exactly? Easier for me because I thought it proved I belonged? Or easier for them because it kept me quiet? I flipped to a page where I had written down a reminder to myself weeks ago. Ask Oren about splitting the photographer deposit. I had never asked. I could hear his voice, the way he'd say, "Babe, it's fine. My mom said she would handle it. Don't stress." And I didn't, because the last thing I wanted was to seem like I was making money the center of our future. But money was always there, lurking under every conversation, every family dinner, every holiday where I sat at the table while Isolde raised an eyebrow at the gifts I brought, while Oren squeezed my hand under the table, like that was enough to make it okay. I thought about the night I stayed up editing Oren's pitch deck for a client he was trying to land, the way he fell asleep on the couch while I double-checked the numbers, cleaned up the slides, made sure every comma was where it should be. The next morning, he thanked me with a quick kiss on the forehead, saying, "Mom said it was good you're supportive." Supportive. Like that was my role, my place, the space they would allow me to fill as long as I didn't ask for more. I pressed my palm flat against the notebook, breathing in slowly, the hurt curling hot and sharp in my chest. The word gold digger echoed in the quiet room, hitting harder each time it rolled through my mind, the memory of Isolde's laughter and Oren's chuckles stabbing at every soft part of me I had kept open for them. The word was the opposite of who I was, but I let it hang in the air because I was too shocked, too hurt, too tired of trying to prove myself. Across the room, the morning light caught on the pearl earrings sitting on the coffee table, their surface smooth, perfect, reflecting the gray sky outside. I reached for them, holding them in my hand, the weight of them grounding me as I closed my fist around them. I wasn't what they said I was. I wasn't going to let their silence and their laughter define me. I got up, moving to the kitchen table where I started stacking receipts, notes, and printouts, sorting them into a neat pile. Each piece of paper was a reminder of every moment I gave something of myself without asking for acknowledgement. Every small payment, every late night spent helping Oren prepare for something that would only benefit him while I stood in the background, smiling politely when his mother praised him, ignoring me. I found a folder, one I had used for tax documents, and began sliding the papers inside, each slip of paper like a quiet promise to myself that I would not let them erase me, that I would not let them paint me as something I wasn't while using my effort, my money, and my love to build the illusion of their perfect family. When I finished, I took a pen and wrote one word on the front of the folder, pressing hard until the ink nearly bled through the paper. Me. The drizzle had turned into a steady rain, the city outside washed in gray, the sound a comfort now instead of a reminder of the cold. I placed the folder inside a drawer, closing it softly, pausing for a moment with my hand resting on the handle, breathing in the quiet resolve that had begun to replace the hollow ache in my chest. I moved to the window, leaning my forehead against the cool glass, watching the rain blur the view of the street below. People moved with umbrellas, cars passed with splashes of water against the curbs, the world continuing on while I stood there, letting the truth of what I had given sink in. Not just the money, not just the plans, but the pieces of myself I had handed over without a second thought, believing it was the price of love, the cost of belonging. I whispered to the rain-streaked glass, the words tasting like steel, "I am not what they say I am." And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I meant it. When I opened my eyes that morning, the room was washed in a soft gray light that made everything feel quiet, as if the world was holding its breath along with me. I lay there for a moment, letting the ceiling come into focus, the stillness pressing down, but it felt different this time, less like a weight, more like space, a place where I could finally think. I pulled myself up, feet cold against the wood floor, and wrapped a blanket around my shoulders as I shuffled into the kitchen. The coffee machine hummed, the familiar scent filling the small apartment, grounding me while the city outside slowly came alive with the sound of tires on wet pavement. As I waited for the coffee to brew, I scrolled through my phone, clearing notifications without really seeing them. That was when I saw the message, the one that made me stop breathing for a second. It was from my principal, asking if we could speak that morning about something that had come up regarding my personal conduct. My thumb hovered over the screen, my mind racing. I called her immediately, the coffee forgotten, the cup left to steam quietly on the counter while I paced the living room, each step echoing in the small space. Her voice was gentle, but I could hear the discomfort as she explained that Oren's mother, Isolde, had contacted the school board, raising concerns about my emotional stability and whether I was in the right headspace to continue teaching children, hinting that there were personal issues that could reflect poorly on the school. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, the world spinning slightly as I tried to absorb what she was saying. The quiet Sunday morning turned sharp, the drizzle outside suddenly matching the sound of blood pounding in my ears. Is this about my engagement?" I managed to ask, my voice sounding foreign, tight. She hesitated, then admitted, "Her email mentioned some concerns about your behavior at a family event, questioning your judgment." I thanked her for letting me know, promising I would speak to her again soon, and ended the call before my hands could start shaking more visibly. I sank onto the couch, the blanket slipping off my shoulders, pooling around me like a lifeline I couldn't grab onto. The fear of losing my job crawled into my chest, icy and suffocating. The classroom flashed in my mind, my students, their drawings pinned to the bulletin board, their laughter when we sang songs about rain, their small hands holding mine when they were scared or proud or just needed to know someone was there. The idea of losing them, of having to pack up the small plant on my desk and the stack of books I read to them on rainy days, made the tears come before I could stop them. I pressed the heels of my hands to my eyes, trying to hold myself together. For a fleeting moment I thought about calling Oren. Maybe he could fix this. Maybe he would finally stand up, tell his mother to stop, to leave me alone. But as quickly as the thought came, I remembered that laugh, the shrug, the way he always let me take the hits to keep the peace. I wasn't going to beg for his help. Not this time. I picked up the phone to call Elowen, my sister, but my thumb hovered over her name. Fear and shame mixing in the pit of my stomach. What would I even say? That I let them push me this far? That I was afraid to stand up for myself again? I let the phone drop onto the couch beside me, breathing hard, staring at the small apartment that now felt like a cage. My eyes drifted to the drawer where I had placed the folder marked Me. I stood, crossing the room, pulling it out with hands that still trembled, flipping it open on the coffee table. There they were. The receipts, the notes in my handwriting, the printouts of emails, the reminders of every piece of me I had given without acknowledgement. I ran my fingers over the pages, each one a testament to the work I had done, the support I had given, the quiet ways I had built a life that they dismissed with a laugh and a label. The anger started low, a simmer in the pit of my stomach, pushing against the fear that tried to keep it down. I wasn't going to let them take this from me too. I wasn't going to let them use my silence as a weapon. I took a deep breath, picking up the phone again, this time calling my principal back. She answered quickly, and I could hear the concern in her voice. "I want you to know," I said, steadying my voice, "that whatever personal situation I'm dealing with, it does not affect my ability to teach, to care for my students, or to maintain professionalism in my work. I can provide documentation if necessary, and I will not allow my personal life to be twisted to harm my career." There was a pause, and then she sighed, a soft, warm sound that made me feel less alone. "Thank you for clarifying, Lavinia. I believe in your commitment to your students. We'll handle this if it comes up further." After we hung up, I sat there for a moment, letting the silence settle around me, but it felt different this time. Less like suffocation, more like space. I turned toward the window, catching my reflection in the glass, the drizzle outside casting a soft glow around me. "You chose the wrong teacher to threaten," I whispered to that reflection, the words sharp and certain, a promise to myself that I would not let them silence me again. The knock came just as the streetlights flickered on outside, casting long reflections on the wet pavement. I froze, my hand hovering over the light switch near the door, pulse thudding in the quiet. For a moment I considered ignoring it, but something in the knock, firm, steady, pushed me to open the door. Rachel stood there, her hair damp from the drizzle, holding a paper bag that smelled of garlic and warm bread. She didn't wait for an invitation, just walked past me, dropping her bag on the coffee table and shaking off her coat. "Don't look at me like that," she said, glancing back as she slipped off her shoes. "You didn't think I'd let you sit here alone, did you?" I closed the door, leaning against it, trying to swallow the tightness in my throat. She moved around my small living room like she belonged there, pulling out takeout containers, opening a bottle of wine she'd tucked under her arm. The simple, familiar motions filled the space, making it feel less like a tomb and more like a place where life could still happen. "I heard," Rachel finally said, settling onto the couch, her eyes searching mine. "People talk, you know." I sank into the chair across from her, pulling my knees to my chest, the exhaustion of the day heavy in my bones. I didn't have to ask what she meant. The letter from HR lay on the coffee table between us, its words burned into my mind. Serious allegations, investigation, professional conduct, stability. "They're trying to take everything," I whispered, my voice cracking despite my effort to hold it steady, all because I wouldn't stay quiet. Rachel reached for my hand, her grip warm and grounding. "They're scared of you, Lavinia, scared because you know how to stand your ground. That's why they're doing this." I wanted to believe her, but fear kept creeping back, whispering that maybe I had made a mistake, that maybe I should have just kept my head down, ignored the insults, and kept my job safe. I thought about the laughter of my students, their drawings that I pinned on the walls, the notes they left on my desk. Was I going to lose all of that because I dared to walk away from a family that wanted to own me? Rachel let go of my hand and started pulling items from her bag, a folder, a small stack of papers, her phone. "You have to fight back," she said, looking at me with that fierce, unblinking honesty that always made me feel seen. "You're not alone in this." "I don't even know where to start," I admitted, the shame of feeling helpless catching in my chest. Rachel pushed the folder toward me. "Start here. You have your performance reviews, the emails from parents, the thank you notes from Oren himself about how you supported him. You've got more than they think." I hesitated, then reached for the folder, flipping through the papers, the familiar handwriting of parents thanking me for helping their kids learn to read, for staying late to help with projects, for caring. I felt something flicker in me, a small, stubborn light. Rachel poured 2 glasses of wine, handing one to me. "Remember when you helped me last year with that parent who tried to get me fired over a grade? You told me to fight because the truth mattered." I managed a small smile, remembering the way Rachel had stood in the principal's office, unshaken, refusing to apologize for holding a student accountable. "That was different," I said. "No," Rachel shot back. "It wasn't. They're using fear to silence you, just like they tried to silence me. Don't let them decide who you are." We sat in silence for a moment, the soft hum of the city outside filling the spaces between us. I sipped the wine, letting its warmth spread through me, grounding me. Rachel's presence reminded me that I wasn't as alone as I felt. After we ate, Rachel stood, pulling her coat back on. She paused at the door, turning to look at me. "Promise me you'll fight, Lavinia." I looked down at the papers in my hand, then back at her. "I'll try." "No," she said firmly. "Not try. Do it." She left, the door clicking softly shut behind her. I stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle again, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. I walked to the window, looking out at the glistening streets, the glow of headlights reflecting off the wet pavement, the world moving on even as mine felt paused. I pressed my hand to the cold glass, breathing slowly, letting the fear drain out as best as I could. I thought about Isolde, about the way she tried to control everything with a smile and a threat hidden behind polite words. I thought about Oren, about the way he had let her do it. Then I thought about my students, their laughter, their trust, and how much they deserved a teacher who would not be silenced. Rachel's words echoed in my mind as I whispered them to the dark window, "Don't let them decide who you are." The morning came sharp and cold, sunlight barely brushing the tops of the damp buildings outside as I pulled my sweater tighter around me. I set my coffee down, the steam curling into the chilly air, and opened my laptop with the same cautiousness you'd use to open a letter bomb. I wasn't ready, but I was done waiting for someone else to save me. I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of receipts, printed emails, and folders I had labeled the night before. For a moment, I closed my eyes, hearing Rachel's voice reminding me, "Don't let them decide who you are." I didn't know if I was brave, but I knew I was tired of being quiet. I started with the emails, scrolling through threads that once seemed harmless. Wedding planning, dinner reservations, donations for Oren's family's foundation. My eyes scanned them, searching for something, anything, that could explain the weight I felt pressing on me since the night I left that restaurant. My coffee turned cold as I kept clicking, scanning, reading. And then I found it. It was an email from Isolde to Oren, forwarded to me months ago when we were confirming venue details, buried under attachments of menus and seating charts. Her words were there, clear as the winter sky outside. "Make sure Lavinia signs the venue paperwork. If things don't work out, it's better she holds the deposit, not us." I reread it, my hand trembling as I pressed it against my chest, feeling the rage unfurl inside me like a fire waking up. My mind spun back to the day we signed the venue contract. Oren had smiled at me, telling me it was just a formality, that we were in this together, that it made things easier. Easier for him, I realized now, easier for them to walk away while I was left with the debt and the blame. My vision blurred, but I refused to let the tears fall. I dug deeper, pulling up bank statements, cross-checking them with receipts I had saved out of habit, a habit my mother once taught me as she sorted bills at our kitchen table in Oregon. Payment after payment had come directly from my account, venue deposits, caterer retainers, even part of the photography fee. Oren had always told me he would handle it later, that his parents would take care of it. They never did. I found the spreadsheet I made for Oren's family foundation, the hours I spent after teaching all day, crafting reports and tracking donations so Oren could impress his parents. His name was on every page, the credit his, while I was thanked with a pat on the head and a glass of wine, told, "You're so helpful, Lavinia." Helpful. The word hit me like a slap. I closed my laptop, breathing hard, the room spinning as I tried to process the betrayal layered beneath every polite smile, every dismissive laugh, every empty promise of, "We'll fix it later." They had used me, and I had let them, believing that love meant sacrifice, that silence kept the peace. I looked over at the pearl earrings on the coffee table, the light catching on them as if my mother's voice was there, whispering that I was worth more than the way they treated me. I stood up, pushing my shoulders back, letting the anger settle into something sharper, cleaner. I would not be their silent casualty. I opened my laptop again, this time with purpose. I scanned the documents, labeled them into folders. For HR, for legal, for me. Each click felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, pulling my voice back from the shadows they had shoved it into. I wasn't naive enough to think it would be easy, but I was done letting them dictate my worth. After hours of sorting and scanning, I picked up the phone and called Elowen. Her voice was warm, steady, a rope pulling me back from the ledge I hadn't even realized I was on. "Get a lawyer, Lavinia," she said, no hesitation. "Don't go in blind. You've got the proof, but you need to protect yourself before you go public." "I don't even know if I can afford a lawyer," I admitted, the fear of losing my job still crawling under my skin. "You can't afford not to," she replied, her tone gentle but unyielding. "You're not alone in this, but you have to take the first step." We talked for a while, her voice anchoring me as I paced around my kitchen, the afternoon light shifting through the clouds outside. She reminded me of who I was before Oren, before the dinners with his mother, before I was made to feel like I should be grateful for scraps of kindness in exchange for my silence. When we hung up, I sat at the table, the folders stacked neatly in front of me, the coffee now cold, untouched. The silence of the apartment felt different this time, like the calm before a necessary storm, not the emptiness of defeat. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the buildings and the first stars began to poke through the darkening sky, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, seeing Oren's name light up with a message. "We need to talk. It's urgent." I stared at it, the words floating in front of me. The last trace of warmth I had once felt for him gone, replaced by something fierce, protective of the pieces of myself I had finally gathered back together. I stood in front of the door, breathing in the cold draft slipping through the edges, my hand hovering over the knob. Part of me wanted to let him knock until his hand hurt, to leave him out there in the hallway with all the excuses he had never managed to say to my face. But another part of me needed to look him in the eye, to see if the man who had once held my hand at dawn when I was scared could admit the truth he had hidden in silence. I opened the door. Oren stood there, hair a mess, jacket unbuttoned, eyes darting past me before landing on mine. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hallway light flickered, and the distant sound of a neighbor's TV filtered in as he stepped inside without asking. He opened his mouth like he was going to speak, but then closed it, his lips pressing together before the words tumbled out. "Lavinia, I didn't mean for things to get like this." I crossed my arms, leaning against the wall near the door, watching him try to gather the courage to say what he needed to say. My phone was tucked into my back pocket, recording every word, every stutter, every breath. "I tried to stop it," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Mom, she promised she'd fix it, that it would just blow over, but then—" A ping interrupted him. Another. Then another. His phone buzzed again and again, each vibration louder in the heavy silence between us. His face paled as he pulled it from his pocket, the glow lighting up the dread in his eyes. I didn't need to look, but I did, glancing down to see his notifications exploding. Someone had posted pictures from our engagement dinner, twisting the moment I placed the ring down as proof that I was exactly what Isolde had called me, a gold digger. A manipulative woman who had tried to trap Oren for his family's money. The captions were vile, the comments worse, strangers tearing apart a woman they had never met because it was easier than believing a family with money could be cruel. I looked back at him. He was mumbling, something about it being a misunderstanding, that it was his mother's way of protecting the family, that he didn't think it would go this far. "I didn't post it, Lavinia, you have to believe me," he pleaded, stepping closer. "You let it happen," I said, my voice calm, each word precise. "Your silence is louder than your excuses, Oren." He flinched, the truth landing harder than any raised voice could. His phone buzzed again, and he silenced it, staring at me, searching for the softness I used to have for him, the softness I had for the man I thought he was. "She's frozen the deposits," he finally admitted, his shoulders slumping like a child confessing to breaking something fragile. "The money, the deposits, it's all in your name, and Mom's made sure you can't get it back if you take this public. She said it's to protect us, to make sure you don't—" "Don't what?" I asked, taking a step forward, forcing him to look at me. "Tell the truth?" He opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. I watched him struggle, the man who once told me I was the strongest person he knew, unable to stand up to the people tearing me apart. "You're here to protect your family's image, not me," I said. "Don't pretend this is about us." "It's not like that, Lavinia," he tried, reaching for my hand, but I stepped back, letting the space between us widen until it felt like the ocean. I walked over to the table, picking up the folders I had prepared, tapping them lightly against my palm as I looked at him. "I have everything," I said. "The receipts, the emails, your messages, your mother's instructions, and now, this conversation." "Don't do this," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, we can fix this. Just don't go public. Don't ruin everything." "I won't ruin anything," I replied, setting the folders down carefully. "You and your family did that all on your own." He looked at me then, really looked, as if realizing for the first time that I was no longer the woman who would shrink herself to keep the peace. I saw the fear in his eyes, the panic of a man who knew the power he once held over me was gone. "Lavinia, please," he said, stepping closer again, but I shook my head. "I'm done," I said, my voice steady, my spine straightening as I felt every ounce of betrayal transform into resolve. "You chose them, Oren. I choose me." He stood there, eyes glistening, breathing heavily, before turning away. I opened the door for him, holding it wide as he walked out, pausing for a moment as if to say something else, but he didn't. I closed the door behind him, the latch clicking into place louder than I expected in the quiet apartment. I leaned against it, closing my eyes, letting the tears fall for a moment before wiping them away with the back of my hand. "You chose them," I whispered to myself, locking the door, "and I choose me." When I woke up that morning, the air felt different. Crisp, clear, like the rain had washed away the fog that had been sitting heavy in my chest for weeks. I sat at my kitchen table, the steam rising from my coffee curling in the light streaming through the window. The folder of evidence laid out in front of me like a quiet army. It was time. I smoothed down the front of my blouse, tying my hair back, feeling every small act of preparation grounding me as I grabbed my laptop and placed it into my bag. Before leaving, I took a final glance around the apartment, at the post-it notes of encouragement Elowen had sent me, at the pearl earrings resting in the small dish by the door, catching the light. My mother's voice echoed softly in my mind, "Don't let them tell your story." The school board's office was colder than I remembered, the hum of the overhead lights buzzing like a warning as I sat down across from the panel and the HR representative. They greeted me politely, but I could feel the caution in their eyes, the kind reserved for people about to become a problem. I opened my laptop, pulling up the files I had prepared, my hands steady. "Thank you for meeting with me," I began, my voice calm but unwavering. "I'm here today because I need you to understand the truth." Their eyes flickered toward one another as I began, laying out the timeline of what had been happening behind closed doors. I showed them the emails, the text messages, the screenshots of social media posts that twisted the story of the engagement dinner into something ugly, something used to smear me. I played the recording of Oren's visit, his voice admitting to the manipulation, the financial entrapment, the silence he had chosen over defending me. The room was silent except for the small whir of the laptop fan, the truth hanging in the air between us. I watched their faces shift from skepticism to disbelief to anger as the reality settled in. One board member cleared her throat, shaking her head, her eyes hard. "This should have never reached you like this, Lavinia." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I've worked hard for my students. I won't let their trust in me be used as a weapon." When the meeting ended, I walked out into the crisp Seattle air, the weight on my shoulders lighter, my steps more certain. I had reclaimed my narrative, refusing to let Isolde's whispers define who I was or what I stood for. As I reached for the door handle of my car, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window, the lines around my eyes softer, the set of my jaw stronger. I drove straight to Ms. Ramirez's office, the small law practice tucked away in a brick building off Pine Street. The scent of coffee and paper met me as I entered, Ms. Ramirez looking up from her desk with a steady gaze that made me feel like I wasn't fighting alone. "You're ready?" she asked, as I placed the folders on her desk. "I am," I replied. She flipped through the documents, nodding as she read over the annotated receipts, the bank statements showing the deposits made in my name, the emails that revealed Isolde's intent. "We'll send the cease and desist today," Ms. Ramirez said, her pen tapping lightly against the folder, "and we'll file to recover the deposits. They don't get to bully you into silence." A wave of relief washed over me, not because it was over, but because it was beginning. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was no longer trapped in the corner they had pushed me into, that I was finally stepping into the fight they thought I was too small to win. When I left the office, the sky was a pale blue, the air cool against my skin, as I pulled out my phone to text Elowen. "It's done," I wrote. Seconds later, her reply came, "Proud of you." I tucked the phone into my bag, walking back to my car with the quiet certainty of a woman who knew her worth, who would not be erased because it was convenient for someone else's comfort. That evening, as I was making tea, the kettle humming softly, I heard the quiet shuffle of paper sliding under my door. My heart stilled. the steam rising as I walked over, picking up the envelope, my name scrawled on the front in careful handwriting that reeked of control. Inside was a letter from Isolde's legal team, the cold, formal language spelling out threats and intimidation, but it was the handwritten note at the bottom that caught my breath. "We can end this quietly, or you can destroy everything." I stood there, reading the words again and again, the threat clear, the fear they were trying to invoke almost tangible. But as I lowered the letter, folding it carefully, I realized I wasn't scared, not anymore. I set the letter down on the kitchen counter, the handwriting still lingering in my mind, but instead of fear, a strange calm settled over me. The message was clear enough, a thinly veiled threat wrapped in polite legal language, but the handwritten scrawl at the bottom, "We can end this quietly, or you can destroy everything," was nothing more than fear, dressed as control. I finished the last sip of my coffee, rinsed the mug in the sink, and walked out onto the balcony. The air was sharp with the promise of a clear day, the kind that makes Seattle feel alive, the sun cutting through the lingering morning chill. I closed my eyes, letting the breeze brush against my face, reminding me that no matter what they tried to take, I was still here. I picked up my phone and snapped a photo of the letter, attaching it in a message to Ms. Ramirez with a simple, "Proceed." A few minutes later, I received her reply, "Understood. Let them be afraid." A smile pulled at the corner of my mouth as I slid the phone into my pocket. I didn't need to hide anymore, didn't need to shrink myself to make others comfortable. I let the morning wrap around me like an old friend before heading back inside to grab the last box I had left in the corner of my bedroom, labeled "Wedding." The box felt lighter than I remembered as I carried it down to my car, driving across the city to the small storage unit I had rented in Ballard. The streets buzzed with the quiet rhythm of a Saturday morning, people walking dogs, carrying coffees, living lives that were theirs, free and unburdened. I wanted that feeling, and for the first time, I believed it was possible. At the storage unit, I pulled open the metal door, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. I set the box down, opened it, and reached inside, pulling out my mother's pearl earrings. They glinted softly in the thin strip of sunlight that cut across the floor, reminding me of the nights she would sit at the kitchen table, telling me stories about choosing yourself even when the world tells you to sit down and be quiet. I put the earrings on, looking into the small mirror I kept in the glove compartment of my car. For a moment, I just looked at myself, really looked, and saw someone who had fought her way through fear, betrayal, and doubt, and was still standing. As I placed the empty box back into the unit, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. It was a message from Ms. Ramirez. "Settlement reached. They've agreed to return the deposits, sign the non-disclosure, and your record with the school is clear. Congratulations, Lavinia." I leaned against the car, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It wasn't about winning over them. It was about reclaiming my life, my story, and the pieces of myself I had given away, thinking it was the price for love and acceptance. On the drive back, I stopped by the small community center where I had been volunteering for the children's reading program on weekends. The air inside smelled of crayons and old books, the chatter of children filling the room as they gathered around me for story time. I opened a book and began to read, the small faces looking up at me, wide-eyed and eager. One small hand tugged at my sleeve, a little voice saying, "You're the best teacher." Those words settled into a place in my heart that had been hollow for too long. Later, as the sun began its slow descent, painting the city in hues of orange and pink, I walked home through the neighborhood. The weight that had pressed down on my shoulders for months was gone, replaced by a quiet strength I hadn't felt since before Oren, before the lies, before I allowed myself to believe that silence was love. As I turned the corner near my building, I saw him. Oren stood across the street, his hands buried in his pockets, his gaze fixed on me with a look I couldn't quite name, regret, maybe, or the realization of what he had lost. We held eye contact for a moment, the world around us moving while we stood still. I nodded once, a simple acknowledgement, then turned and continued walking, the past falling away with every step I took. When I got home, I walked out onto the balcony, the cool evening breeze lifting the strands of hair from my face. I removed the pearl earrings, holding them in my hands for a moment before placing them into the small wooden box on the table. I closed the lid softly and whispered, "Thank you, Mom. I finally chose me." I sat down, pulling my knees to my chest, letting the quiet of the evening settle around me. I knew I wasn't fully healed, that trust would take time to rebuild, and that some nights would still feel heavy. But for the first time, I wasn't living in fear of what would happen if I said no, if I stood up for myself, if I chose to walk away. Sometimes the gift you leave behind isn't for them, it's for you.